This was published in the British Medical Journal, which is sort of like the British version of the New England Journal of Medicine. It's a fairly well known medical journal, and this was actually published in 2001. That was over 20 years ago. And here's the title: Effect of Rosary Prayer and Yoga Mantras on Autonomic Cardiovascular Rhythms, a Comparative Study. The effect of Rosary Prayer and Yoga Mantras on Autonomic Cardiovascular Rhythms, a Comparative Study. So we've actually talked about these many times. We've talked about mantra. We've talked about the repetition of a word, sound, or phrase, but they actually bring in specifically rosary prayer. And they actually did the Ave Maria. They had people recite the Ave Maria prayer in Latin or another mantra of their choice, and they had them hooked up to all these devices, and they started looking at all these autonomic cardiovascular rhythms. And remember, when we say autonomic, what we're talking about there is we're talking about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system, right? There's a sort of the classification of the autonomic nervous system, and how the sympathetic nervous system usually ramps things up and is the fight or flight, the stress response when we feel attacked or we need to protect ourselves. Oftentimes we go into a fight or flight, or sometimes what happens is we freeze. That's a different sort of mechanism. And then the parasympathetic nervous system, which is that what we've called the rest and digest. So here they looked at. So what they looked at is they looked at their breathing rate. They looked at their regularity of breathing. They looked at a baroreflex sensitivity, so the sensitivity of the baroreflex, and what that is essentially when you stand up really quickly, you need to sort of adjust, because when you stand up really quickly, the blood rushes away from your head, and so therefore your body needs to recognize, like there's actually a part of you that needs to recognize that you just changed, and so the pressure in your system needs to change to keep blood flowing to your head. And so that's the sensitivity of the baroreflexes. If you don't have good sensitivity in the baroreflexes, you can you stand up really quickly and then you get really lightheaded and you can actually pass out, because you don't activate the baroreflex response, which then will trigger blood to stay in your brain as opposed to come out. Frequency of cardiovascular oscillations. So this is what they found. So what they did is they had some of these people recite the Ave Maria prayer or a mantra. And the mantra, believe it or not, was actually a mantra that we have spoken about here, which is Om Mani Padme Hum Om. Om Mani Padme Om. That was the mantra that they were taught. Or reciting the Ave Maria prayer in Latin. And they taught them, so they actually had a yoga instructor come in and just teach them the mantra. The yoga instructor had no idea what the study was done, did not teach them to do it at any rhythm or any pace. It was sort of like allow the person to recite the mantra and find the pace that resonates for them. Okay, which is kind of neat, right? It's not like look, we have a metronome here, and every time it clicks, you're gonna recite the mantra, right? It's just this is how you recite the mantra, and this is how you pronounce the words, and just do it and see what happens, and see how quickly you want to do it, right? Um, the subject studied had no previous experience of yoga, but in the days before the study, they were briefly instructed how to recite the mantra by a yoga teacher unaware of the aim of the study. Briefly, they were instructed to repeat the mantra with an alive, resonant voice, to listen to the sound produced, and let it flow freely. And then to complete the expiration comfortably after the end of the mantra, and to pause only if a rest was needed prior to the next cycle. No instruction was given as to time to be taken or any particular pitch to be used. All right, so essentially it's sort of like you take an in-breath, right? And whatever it is, you listen to the words. And if you've ever done this, right, if you're ever in conversation and you've done this mindfulness of speaking, we've talked about this, is where you listen to your words coming out, and there's a slowing down, right? So essentially it'd be Om, where you listen to the sound Om, Mani Padme, Om, and you finish the exhale. And then you pause for as long as you feel like is necessary. It's not like they counted the pauses, say, okay, you need to take a 5-second pause. Both the Ave Maria and the yoga mantra had similar effects, slowing respiration to around 6 breaths per minute. Isn't that fascinating? Now, this is why this is fascinating. You've heard us talking about this 6 breaths a minute. We've brought this up, and if you can't remember where we brought this up, we've actually brought this up with having people brain scanned under a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine and seeing greatest cohesion and communication between different parts of the brain when participants are breathing at 6 breaths a minute. That there's something that happens to the brain when we breathe at 6 breaths a minute that increases cohesion, connections, and rest. Right? So the natural repetition of a mantra or the Ave Maria prayer had people coming to this 6 breaths a minute. Okay. And synchronizing breathing with heart rate variability, all cardiovascular rhythms started to synchronize. All cardiovascular rhythms started to synchronize. Breathing and heart rate, blood pressure. This was seen not only in the respiratory signals, but also in the RR interval, systolic and diastolic blood pressures, and in transcranial blood flow signal. So they actually looked at blood flow into the brain. And there was a synchronization of blood flow into the brain when people were reciting the Ave Maria prayer in Latin or doing their mantra, Om Mani Padme Om. Om Mani Padme Om. The spontaneous respiratory rate during spontaneous breathing for all the participants was 14.1 breaths per minute. 14, that's about what we consider to be, we always say 12 to 20. Okay, so that's right in that range. So imagine going from, right, you're just hanging out and you're breathing at 14 breaths a minute, and then you start doing the mantra and you come down to 6. That's less than half, right? That's some profound. So we take about 14 breaths per minute during spontaneous breathing. It's slowed down during free talking, and it's slowed down further during the recitation of the Ave Maria and of the mantra, in both cases to close to 6 breaths per minute. The timing of the Ave Maria and the yoga mantra, as normally spoken in the original language, turned out to be close to 10 seconds for each cycle. So six breaths a minute, 6 times per minute. This frequency, 6 per minute, coincides with the subject's spontaneous wave frequency and thus enhanced cardiovascular oscillation by synchronizing sympathetic and vagal output. This even resulted in rhythmic fluctuations in cerebral blood flow, which might directly influence central nervous system oscillation. This was in 2001 when they were talking about this. Okay, and now we know that actually when we breathe at 6 breaths a minute, there's some effect on the brain waves themselves. Here's the thing. Is this culturally distinct practices? Is there anything linking these two geographically and culturally distinct practices? Surprisingly, there is historical evidence for a link. The rosary was introduced to Europe by the Crusaders, who took it from the Arabs, who in turn took it from Tibetan monks and the yoga masters of India. This supports the hypothesis that the similar characteristics and effects of these mantras and of the rosary may not be a simple coincidence. The benefits of respiratory exercises to slow respiration in the practice of yoga have been long reported, and mantras have been evolved as a simple device to slow respiration, improve concentration, and induce calm. Mantras are normally repeated in sequences of more than 100. Usually people use, instead of the rosary, they use a mala, which has 108 beads. Similar to the rosary, 150 times. The relatively long time required to perform the entire sequence is similar to that of modern training sessions for any physical activity. This again suggests that one of the goals could be to induce physical in addition to psychological changes. Owing to the very large number of repetitions of the same prayer, the rosary is unique among prayers of the Christian religion. The rhythm necessarily imposed by these repetitions induces a fixed respiratory rate at a predetermined frequency. In times when stopwatches and metronomes had still to be invented, a rhythmic formula was the easiest way to keep a reasonably accurate timing in the range of several seconds per breath, and thus a good way to learn to slow respiration to a given rate without the need to concentrate on the respiration itself. Body consciousness was not encouraged in the Christian culture of the Middle Ages. There are thus remarkable similarities in the two practices, duration and number of repetition, and in the cardiovascular effects. The historical circumstances that brought the rosary to Europe also suggest that these similarities were not just coincidence. This practice introduced, consciously or not, a new and previously unrecognized element of Oriental health practice into Western culture. The rosary might be viewed as a health practice as well as a religious practice. They have a little blurb and they say, what is already known, reduced heart rate variability and baroreflexive sensitivity are powerful predictors and independent predictors of poor prognosis in heart disease, right? We've talked about, we want a high heart rate variability. We want the baroreflex to be sensitive, right? Because that shows a dynamic balance between the autonomic nervous system, between the sympathetic and the parasympathetic, that both are able to work. That if you get stressed, stress is fine, right? As long as we can come down. We're all going to get stressed. I just missed a red light or somebody just crossed the light in front of me. We're all going to get stressed, right? It's how our nervous systems are trained to get stress and then come down. And that's that resiliency. And we can test that by looking at the heart rate variability, right? So reduced heart rate variability, meaning you don't have this resiliency, are powerful predictors of poor prognosis in heart disease. Slow breathing enhances heart rate variability. So slow breathing increases heart rate variability and baroreflex sensitivity by synchronizing inherent cardiovascular rhythms. Resuscitation of the rosary and also of yoga mantras slowed respiration to almost exactly 6 breaths per minute and enhanced heart rate variability and baroreflex sensitivity. The rosary might be viewed as a health practice as well as a religious practice. Who would have thunk? Who would have thunk? And so that's going to be our practice. All right, let's go into our practice. Okay, so let's find a comfortable posture. Posture you will feel relaxed yet alert. Closing your eyes if you feel comfortable closing your eyes. If not, having a kind of a soft downward gaze. Taking 2 or 3 deep breaths. And with each inhale, bringing in the present moment. And with each exhale, simply allowing yourself to be in the present moment. To allow any worries or concerns to just be. That at this moment, this is your practice. And then breathing regularly. And for this practice, the focus of this practice would be to repeat a mantra or words, a prayer. If you know the Ave Maria prayer, reciting that. If you have a mantra that is authentic to you or that was given to you, reciting that. If you have a phrase that you repeat to yourself, reciting that. If you wish to recite Om Mani Padme Om, which is the mantra that they taught in this paper that we just covered. Some people teach it as Om Mani Padme Hum, an Hum. Whatever works for you. If you wish to repeat it out loud, listen to the syllables and the sounds of the words you're using as they come out. Notice the frequency of the words, the natural intonation, how the words are coming out. Reciting your mantra in a way that is alive, finishing your exhalation at the end, pausing if you need to pause, and continuing with the repetition of the mantra. And similar to the practice of mindfulness, as other thoughts or sensations come, recognizing, and for this practice, just choosing not to pay too much attention to them. And come back to your mantra. Notice the frequency with which you are repeating your mantra. Are you slowing down or speeding up? Where your focus and concentration are the repetition of the mantra, whatever it is for you. As you're repeating the mantra to yourself, out loud if you choose, make it as if this is the first and only time you will ever repeat this mantra. With each repetition, that this is the moment. All the intention goes to repeating the mantra, listening to the words, and being fully present for that moment. As if that was your only task at this time. Repeating the mantra and listening to the words. Where your full intention and focus is on the repetition of your mantra. Out loud or to yourself. Speaking and listening to the words. Noticing the frequency with which you are repeating your mantra. Breathing. What have you noticed in your body? And as we bring this meditation to a close today, just noticing how this practice worked or didn't work for you, what you felt in your body, what you noticed in your mind. Did you notice more thoughts or less thoughts? And now taking 2 or 3 deep breaths. Opening your eyes if your eyes were closed. Reorienting yourself to your room and surroundings. Stretching if you feel like you need to stretch. And just taking a moment to reflect on your practice today.